Okay. Um, Introduce yourself.
I am Priyansh. I'm a PhD student at the University of Toronto. I'm from India, from New Delhi, and I've been, active in the whole organizing circle. Especially, we've been organizing demonstrations and protests against the Modi government and against Hindutva. And there's been a long-running tradition of, protesting against Hindutva for 3 decades now. It has been a threat to Indian democracy, and I'm just one of them, one of the protesters.
So, what is the main message of the protests today?
Today is the 70th anniversary of the Indian Constitution being officially drafted. So today's protest was organized to celebrate its values of secularism, of socialism, of democracy. But also today's protest was also about, making ourselves aware of the threats of fascism, of the communal forces, and also the casteist forces. And that's why we all gathered here in huge numbers to lend our voices. There have been protests across the world, but more importantly in India, and there's been big political action across Indian cities, and we are there in support with everyone who's protesting, but also trying to within the GTA area, trying to make our voices heard.
So one of the issues is what would you like to say to the Canadian government in terms of what they've been very silent on this issue. Just tell me what you think about that and what should we be asking our government to do?
I think the Canadian government has to speak out to begin with. As you say, they've been silent for far too long. Canada prides itself on values of openness, and I think it's been made very clear that there's a significant chunk of Indian population that is not being made feel welcome. They are Indian citizens, and they are now facing this serious threat of not merely losing their citizenship, but also being completely rendered stateless. And there's a police violence against protesters. I'm pretty sure that Canada, as a democracy, is opposed to police brutality, is opposed to a government that functions in an authoritarian manner. But also would like to, as an international actor, would like to add its voices for democracy and for openness. And that's why I think it's as what I would like the Canadian government to do is to speak out and support the protesters. There's a lot of Canadian citizens who are out there today who are very concerned about what's happening in places where they came from and then moved to Canada, made Canada their home, but they still obviously carry strong links to the places of origin. And it's important that the Canadian government doesn't speak out only in defense of values of liberal internationalism, but also speaks out for its own citizens.
Thank you. Can you speak to how how you see these protests that are happening in India in terms of, 250 million people participated in the strike. There's been ongoing actions. How does this differ from previous struggles against the BJP?
I think there are a few points that I would really like to stress. What has happened this time is that the terms of the protests are no longer set by the government. So ever since the Modi government came to power in 2014, it has been able to set the terms of the public discourse. Even the opposition is limited because you are already only speaking for the nation or against the nation. Now those tags do not work anymore. You cannot discredit this as only as an anti-national protest, because people have come out in huge numbers we haven't seen before. But the heartwarming thing is that this protest has been led by students and by women. In one of the sites in Delhi, which has been occupied by protesters for over a month now, women, especially old women, have taken charge of this neighborhood, and they're refusing to go away until the government first of all listens to their demands. Forget let alone listen to actually act on them. So I think that's one of the other things to understand. The third thing that I would really like to stress, and I think it hasn't been talked about enough, is the fact that this shows that leftist politics, for the communist parties, and even those who identify themselves on the left spectrum in India, are actually really active within the whole university politics area, because they've really led the organization when it has come to the protests. All the huge numbers that we are seeing shows that there is actually, even though electorally the left parties may have been decimated, but when it comes to social movements, there is they still seem to, their roots seem to run deeper than probably thought. And so this has been a good reality check on that front as well.
And do you see this as this seems to have had an effect on the diaspora community as well? Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I think the diaspora community, and I was walking among the protesters today also during the march, trying to speak to a few people, trying to learn their motivations, and I think and all the conversations I've had over the past month have really revealed to me that many people in the diaspora community feel that this is not the India they recognize. It has changed dramatically. Obviously, there are longer historical injustices, but something has completely changed, which has harmed how the nation is viewed. Essentially, it has completely the image has been sort of ruptured and disrupted. So I think that's why the diaspora community now feels like it has to come out and speak out, because they still have familial roots there, but also one's own links to their homeland are very strong. And if you feel like the shape or the image that you have of your own home is not the same anymore, then people do feel disturbed and want to speak out.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Well, the only thing that I'd like to say in terms of the action that we've carried out here, I think all the protests have been very well attended, and in fact, we've also been surprised by the numbers that we've seen. So this actually shows that people are generally skeptical of. It's not very difficult to make people believe that a certain kind of politics matter, but they don't seem to think that they matter. And I think in this neoliberal, capitalist world that we live, an individual's value is essentially diminished. But what has been really heartwarming to see is that people really do believe that them coming out and speaking in favor of the constitutional values has relevance. It carries weight, and that they've taken up that opportunity. And I guess it's really. It creates room for hope, and I hope that we will carry out more political action, because here it's as responsible citizens, that's the least we can do.
Oh, and I just thought of one other question, which was related to the fact that Modi invited Jair Bolsonaro to be the chief guest, I believe is the title, at the ceremonies in India, the official ceremonies in India. Can you comment on that?
Well, I think it's been now very well documented that all right-wing authoritarian leaders are not only speaking to each other, but they're also trying to learn from each other. And I think Jair Bolsonaro will find that even he does not command the level of organization and support within the Hindutva family that Modi does. And this should worry everyone, because particularly because it's really. I mean, as Brazilian citizens, they must be alarmed at what kind of conversations will happen. Much of the political discourse in both countries has been similar. In fact, Bolsonaro came to the leadership and became the president on back of the so-called corruption scandal around Lula and his party. And so did Modi. Modi came with the promise to end corruption, and that he's an honest leader. So I think there are many similarities, there are many worrying similarities. There was a time, maybe a decade ago, when BRICS was considered to be an alternative political formation geopolitically, which most of the state leaders would identify themselves as centrist or to the left, or center-left leaders. That has definitely changed. I think if we see now in all of those nation states, the situation has changed quite dramatically, and the promise of BRICS has failed. And what has replaced it is worrying for anyone who's a dissenting voice against the governments against these governments in their own countries. So this move by the BJP government to invite Bolsonaro as a guest has to be seen as a politically significant move, and we should not really ignore what it can really mean over time, because I think there are being moves made to build a right-wing authoritarian alliance across a transnational alliance, which is very worrying for everyone. And I think today there was one sign that I saw which was trying to which was critical of Bolsonaro's regime. So I think it's also important that we build our own transnational alliances to speak out against these right-wing authoritarian leaders.
Well, and I think the issue of the climate is also something which is of interest, given the Bolsonaro visit, and given that one of Modi's friends, Adani, likes making, or he's got a big new project in Australia. Well, bushfires are burning, the big coal mine there, right?
And yeah, and Adani's been one of the biggest funders of the Modi campaign, and he's been one of the corporate figures who's been linked to his rise even before 2014. And we've read all about the action carried out by the Bolsonaro regime in the Amazon rainforest, and we keep reading very worrying news coming in from Australia and climate change, all the crisis that's coming. It's coming for all of us. So some of the people who are actually heads of state don't seem to realize the grave importance of carrying out action now. It was heartwarming to see that even today we were also able to invite people from different organizations and people who are involved in the climate justice movement came out in support, because they realize that these intersections are important. It's not merely that politics and climate change are separate. And I think that's been very important. That's, I think, been a point that we've been able to make and we've been able to have a conversation about, and now we are responding to it. So the heads of state can continue to believe that climate change is not an issue, but I think the number of people that we saw in the climate strikes, but the alliances that we see against right-wing authoritarianism or fascist forces and people who are active in the climate justice movement only shows that these intersections and these alliances matter, and we must not lose sight of that.
Thank you very much, Priyansh.
Thank you.